Hey there. Ever heard words like karma or nirvana? You might be surprised to know they come from Pali,
Yeah.
the language we're diving into today.
Right.
It's the key to understanding a huge chunk of Buddhist scriptures.
Oh, yeah.
And believe me, its journey through time is way more exciting than you might think.
I think so.
We're using this video lecture, Literature of Pali.
Awesome.
What's fascinating about Pali is that it's not just an ancient language. It's still very much alive in Buddhist practice and study today.
Right.
It's like having a direct line to some of the oldest wisdom traditions in the world.
Absolutely. Okay, so picture this.
Okay.
Ancient India around 1500 BCE. The Aryan people enter the scene, bringing their own language and culture. Heavily influenced by Brahmanism.
Right.
And those ancient Vedic texts, think of them as the foundation of a lot of what we know about Indian spirituality.
Exactly. And over time, their language evolved.
Yeah.
From Vedic, Sanskrit emerged.
Right.
And these super dedicated scholars, like Panini, created grammar rules to keep it pure and unchanged.
Wow.
Can you imagine trying to control how language changes today?
It'd be impossible.
It shows you how important Sanskrit was to them.
Absolutely.
Makes you wonder if they'd be horrified by slang or emojis.
Oh, I'm sure. But then along comes the Buddha, shaking things up in more ways than one.
Oh, yeah.
The video points out that he chose to share his teachings in Magadhi, the language of the powerful Magadha kingdom.
Right.
That must have been a game changer.
It definitely was.
Yeah.
You see, at that time, Sanskrit was primarily used by the elite,
Right.
the Brahmins.
Yeah.
By choosing Magadhi, Buddha made his teachings accessible to everyone.
Absolutely. It's like he was saying, wisdom shouldn't be locked away in a fancy language.
Right.
It should be for all.
That's a powerful point, and it gets even more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
When you realize that even the word Magadhi had so many variations back then.
Really?
Magadhi, Prakrit, Magadhi, just to name a few.
Oh, wow.
It makes you realize how fluid language really is, always changing and adapting over time.
Absolutely. There's a great example of this in the video. It mentions this ancient text, the Patha Rupa Sutta, which claims that even the gods and those who never met Buddha spoke Magadhi.
Okay.
It's like saying Magadhi was the language.
Yeah.
Almost cosmic in its importance.
Okay, so we've got this fascinating backstory.
Yeah.
Ancient India, a mix of languages and cultures.
Right.
And Buddha's choice of Magadhi to spread his message. But here's where I get a little confused.
Oh, yeah.
What exactly is Pali?
Right.
And how does it connect to this Magadhi puzzle?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
The video highlights that the word Pali doesn't even show up in the earliest Buddhist scriptures. The Tipitaka. It's a bit of a mystery.
Wait, so if Pali isn't in the original texts, how did it become the name for the language everyone uses today? Did they just make it up later?
Not exactly. The video explains that Pali actually comes from the word pariya, meaning discourse or teaching.
Okay.
At first, it referred to Buddha's words themselves, not a specific language.
So it was more about what was being said, not how it was being said.
Exactly. And it wasn't until much later, I think the 19th or 20th century, that Pali became the official name for the language of those scriptures.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
For centuries, people were studying these texts without even calling it Pali.
Right.
It makes you wonder if they even thought of it as a separate language back then.
Yeah, right.
Speaking of which, the video mentions this funny thing about Pali exams in Thailand.
What's that?
Where they use Magadhi instead of Pali on the test. Why would they do that?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It shows you that even within Buddhism, there are different interpretations and understandings of what Pali really means.
Okay.
Some scholars see it as a specific language, while others think it encompasses a wider range of Buddhist texts. Closer to what we were calling Magadhi earlier.
So maybe it's not about finding one right answer.
Yeah.
But understanding the nuances and different perspectives.
Right.
Within the tradition.
Right.
Kind of like how we interpret art or literature. There can be many valid readings.
Exactly.
Okay.
It reminds us that language isn't static.
Right.
It evolves.
Yeah.
It gets reinterpreted. And it reflects the complexities of culture and thought.
Okay, so we've untangled this Pali-Magadhi connection.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, it's way more intricate than I imagined.
Uh,
Now let's talk about those scriptures themselves.
okay.
From what I understand, it's not just one book.
Yeah.
A whole library.
You're absolutely right.
Right.
The video explains that it starts with the Tipitaka,
Okay.
considered the most authoritative collection of Buddha's teachings.
Huh.
Then you have the commentaries,
Right.
called Akhyata,
Uh-huh.
offering explanations and interpretations.
Okay.
And if that wasn't enough,
Wow.
there are even sub-commentaries,
Really?
known as Kitka, which go even deeper.
Wow, talk about dedication.
It's a lot.
But here's the big question.
Yeah.
Why should anyone today, in our modern world, care about learning this ancient language and diving into these complex texts?
Right.
What's in it for us?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? The video makes it clear.
Yeah.
All these texts,
Yeah.
from the Tipitaka to those deep dive sub-commentaries, are in Pali.
Okay.
If you want to understand Buddhist thought in its most authentic form, you need this language.
So it's like having the original recipe.
Yeah.
Not just someone else's interpretation of it.
Exactly. It's about going to the source.
All right. I'm convinced.
Great.
Let's say I'm ready to jump in and learn Pali.
Okay.
Where do I even begin? Is it like trying to decipher hieroglyphs?
It might seem daunting, but the video breaks it down into 4 key areas.
Okay.
First, you've got Pali grammar, the building blocks, how words are formed, conjugated, all that fun stuff.
Right.
Then there's chandas,
Okay.
which is prosody. It's
Yeah.
about the rhythm,
Okay.
the poetry of the language.
Right.
Think of it like this.
Okay.
You can read a poem,
Yeah.
but understanding its meter and rhyme makes you appreciate it on a whole other level.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the words themselves, but how they flow together.
Right.
What are the other 2 areas?
You'll need a good Pali dictionary.
Okay.
Or Nikandu, like the Abhihana Padipika. Imagine trying to read Shakespeare without a dictionary.
Good point.
And finally, there's Ketuba, which is rhetoric.
Okay.
This is where it gets really interesting because it's about the art of persuasion.
Right.
How language is used to create meaning and impact.
So it's like understanding not just what's being said, but how it's being said and why.
Exactly.
It sounds like a challenging but fascinating journey.
It is. The video mentions a Thai scholar, Prince Vahiranyana Varorasa, who realized how difficult it was to learn Pali,
Right.
and actually created these easier to understand grammar texts in Thai.
That's pretty awesome.
It is.
So we've got these different approaches to grammar. And what about Prince Vahiranyana's version?
Right.
How did he structure his teachings to make them easier to grasp?
He broke it down into 4 main parts,
Okay.
starting with Akaraviti.
Mm.
Think of it as Pali 101.
Okay.
The alphabet, how sounds are made, the very basics. Then there's Vakavibhaga,
Okay.
which is etymology. It's about understanding the origin of words and how they relate to each other.
So like tracing the family tree of words. That sounds kind of cool.
Yeah,
What comes next?
exactly. Then you have Vakya Sambandha,
Okay.
which focuses on syntax, how words come together to form sentences and create meaning.
Right.
Think of it like the grammar rules, but on a larger scale.
So like learning the blueprint for building a house
Yeah.
instead of just knowing what bricks and wood are.
A perfect analogy.
Thanks.
And finally, we circle back to chandas,
Yeah.
that poetic meter we talked about earlier.
Right.
It's about appreciating the beauty and artistry of the language.
Wow, that's quite a journey.
It is.
From basic sounds to poetic mastery. But, thinking about all this makes me wonder about something.
Oh, yeah.
If Pali emerged as a distinct language much later, how did people understand those ancient scriptures before they even had a name for the language?
Yeah. That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
It suggests that language transmission isn't always neat and tidy.
Right.
Back then, people probably didn't have such strict definitions. They might have seen it as a continuation of Magadhi,
Okay.
a natural evolution.
So it's like how we might understand Shakespearean English today.
Yeah,
It's different, but we can still grasp the meaning right.
exactly. And over time,
Okay.
as the study of these texts became more formalized,
Right.
the need for a more specific label,
Uh-huh.
a distinct identity for the language,
Right.
probably emerged.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But speaking of understanding,
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm a bit of a visual learner. Do you think there are any examples in the video that could help illustrate how these 4 areas, grammar, prosody, dictionary, rhetoric, actually help us unlock meaning in the scriptures.
That's a great point. Let's say you come across the Pali word dukkha in a text.
Okay.
You look it up in your Nikandu, your dictionary.
Right.
And it translates to suffering.
Okay.
Okay, you've got the basic meaning. But then by understanding the grammar, you realize dukkha is being used in a specific form, maybe to emphasize its pervasiveness. Chandas, the poetic meter, might reveal a rhythm or repetition that emphasizes the feeling of suffering.
Okay.
And finally, rhetoric helps you see how the text is structured to persuade the reader about the nature of suffering.
So it's like each layer adds depth and nuance to our understanding.
Yeah.
Kind of like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Exactly. It's not just about knowing the words.
Right.
It's about experiencing the text on multiple levels.
I'm starting to see why Pali is considered so essential to Buddhist studies. It's not just a language, it's a gateway to a whole way of thinking and experiencing the world.
Right.
But, I have to be honest. While Pali is fascinating, I also wonder if studying Buddhism through translations is still valuable.
Right.
I mean, not everyone can become a Pali scholar.
That's a valid point. And thankfully, there are many excellent translations of Buddhist texts available today.
Right.
They provide a great entry point for those who don't have the time or resources to learn Pali.
So it's kind of like watching a movie with subtitles.
Yeah.
You might miss some of the nuances of the original language.
Yeah.
But you can still follow the story and appreciate the themes.
Exactly. And for many people, that's a perfectly valid and enriching way to engage with Buddhist teachings.
Right.
But just like watching a film in its original language can offer a deeper understanding, so too can learning Pali open up new layers of meaning and appreciation.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not an either-or situation.
Right.
It's about recognizing the value of both approaches.
Exactly.
But for those who are intrigued and want to take the plunge, what advice would you give someone starting their Pali journey?
First, embrace the challenge. Learning any language takes time and effort, but the rewards are immense. There are some great resources out there.
Oh, yeah.
Like the website Pali for Beginners.
Okay.
They have grammar lessons, vocab lists, even interactive exercises.
And what about those different lineages of Pali grammar we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Kakyana, Magallana, Setaniti.
Right.
Do you have a personal favorite or find one approach more insightful?
That's a tricky one. Yeah. It's like asking a chef to choose their favorite spice.
Right.
Each lineage offers a unique perspective, reflecting the evolution of the language and its study across different regions and historical periods.
So it's kind of like having different schools of thought within Pali scholarship.
Yeah.
Each with its own strengths and emphasis.
Exactly.
Okay.
Kakyana is known for its clear and concise rules, while Magallana delves deeper into the philosophical underpinnings of the language.
Wow.
Sataniti, on the other hand, focuses on the practical application of grammar in understanding texts.
It sounds like a buffet of options.
It is.
But wouldn't it be overwhelming to try and learn all 3 approaches at once?
That's why it's good to start with one and explore the others as your understanding grows.
Right.
Think of it like tasting different wines. You develop your palate over time.
I like that analogy. But, as we've been talking about grammar and pronunciation, I can't help but wonder, is it really that important to get the sounds exactly right? Especially for those who might be interested in chanting or reciting Buddhist texts.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'd butcher the pronunciation.
That's a common concern.
Yeah.
While perfect pronunciation is ideal, the most important thing is to approach it with respect and a willingness to learn. There are great audio resources and videos available that can help you get a feel for the sounds.
Right.
And remember, even experienced practitioners are always refining their pronunciation.
So it's about progress, not perfection.
Absolutely. And as you become more comfortable with the sounds, you'll find that chanting and recitation become a beautiful way to connect with the texts on a deeper level.
It makes me think of how music can evoke emotions even if you don't understand the lyrics. The sounds themselves have a power.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Pali chanting has a rich tradition with specific melodies and rhythms that enhance the meaning and impact of the words.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the richness and depth of Pali.
It's a fascinating language.
It's not just an ancient language. It's a living tradition that connects us to centuries of wisdom and practice. But I have to ask, thinking about all the complexities we've discussed, do you think there are any misconceptions about Pali that you often encounter?
One common misconception is that Pali is a dead language.
Oh, really?
While it's true that it's not spoken as a native language today, it's very much alive in Buddhist communities around the world.
So it's less about everyday conversation.
Right.
And more about preserving and transmitting a specific body of knowledge.
Exactly. It's a language of scholarship, ritual, and spiritual practice. And just like Latin continues to influence language and thought today, so too does Pali hold a special place in the world.
I'm starting to see why learning Pali is seen as more than just a linguistic exercise.
Yeah.
It's about connecting with a living tradition.
Precisely.
Okay.
It's about engaging with a lineage of teachers and practitioners who have dedicated their lives to understanding and sharing the Buddhist teachings.
And speaking of connecting with the past,
I
have one final question for our listeners to ponder. We've been talking about how Pali emerged to preserve the Buddhist teachings, but what about other languages throughout history that served a similar purpose? Are there other examples of languages that became?
Yeah, that's a great question to leave our listeners with.
Yeah.
It encourages them to think about the broader context of how language and culture intertwine. Think about ancient Greek, for instance, or Latin. These languages weren't just about everyday conversations. They carried philosophy, science, and religious ideas that continue to influence us today.
It's amazing to think about how these ancient languages still have a ripple effect on our modern world. Well,
it is.
I think it's safe to say our deep dive into Pali has been a fascinating journey.
Oh, yeah.
We started in ancient India, explored the evolution of language, untangled some linguistic mysteries, and discovered how Pali acts as a window into Buddhist thought.
Absolutely. And hopefully you listening have come away with a new appreciation for the power of language. It connects us to the past, helps us understand the present, and inspires us to keep learning and exploring.
Couldn't have said it better myself, so until our next deep dive.
Yeah.
Keep those minds curious and those ears open to the wonders that language has to offer.